Welcome back to Rugby from the Stands. Last weekend, Toulouse beat Montpellier to win the top 14. And with that, the last of the big club competitions is done for the season. Super Rugby, the Premiership, the URC, Japan's League One, champions all crowned. And that's exactly what I was waiting for. Because now, I've finally got the full picture to answer the question every rugby fan loves to argue about. Which league is actually the best? Now, I didn't want to just give you my opinion. I went and pulled every single match from the last 3 seasons of all major club leagues. That's just under 1,800 games, or 1,784 matches, 5 leagues, 3 seasons to be exact. And I've broken it down across everything: scoring, tries, line breaks, ruck speed, kicking, defense, discipline, and strength in the competition depth. So this isn't a vibe style video. This is what the rugby actually says. 2 quick things up front. 1, we're never truly going to know which league is best. Not until these teams actually play each other in some kind of Club World Cup. So anyone telling you for a fact that their league is the best is at best guessing. But we're fans, and we love to argue about this. So instead of just shrugging and saying it depends, which is, of course, the actual honest answer, let's at least argue about it with the numbers in front of us. And then you can decide. 2, the scope. I'm only looking at what happens on the field, between the posts. I'm not talking about player salaries. I'm not looking at TV deals. I'm not looking at, crowds. Because if we were talking about money and crowds, the top 14 wins this in a canter. Commercially, the French have got club rugby more right than anyone. But that's a different video. This one's just about the rugby. And full disclosure, this one is mainly focusing on my fellow All Black fans and Kiwi fans. Though, of course, any rugby nut anywhere in the world will probably enjoy it, especially those who love nerding it out on stats, right? But I need to get this disclosure out. I grew up on Super Rugby and I absolutely love it. For the last few years, it's basically all I've watched live. Partly, of course, the time zone. Partly because, let's be honest, once you're used to that tempo, the Northern Leagues just feels slow. Even when I do watch Northern Hemisphere leagues, I'll generally watch it whilst I fast forward to ball in play. Because, again, I don't know, it's probably shortening of attention spans, I suppose. So my bias is there. Obviously, my preference is for Super Rugby style attacking rugby. But here's my worry, okay? If all we do down south is watch Super Rugby and we tell ourselves that nobody else knows rugby like we do, that's how you get left behind. The smartest people are the ones who admit what they don't know. Look at Rassi. He's got Tony Brown watching Super Rugby in Japan because he knows those competitions intimately. Then he's got Felix Jones, who is across the Prem and the URC. And then I think he's got one other person in his coaching team who also understands the top 14 intimately as well. So they're watching everyone because everyone's innovating. And to really hit home for my Kiwi fans, we just watched the Hurricanes put 60-5 on my Chiefs in the final. Brutal. I'm over it, by the way, but incredible skill, incredible tempo. And a few years ago, Northern fans would have watched that and gone, wow, that is next level. But go watch how Northampton Saints played this year. Watch the Stormers in the URC. Watch Bordeaux and Toulouse. They're not staring at the Hurricanes in awe anymore. They're playing that same high-skill, high-tempo rugby themselves. So this is for everyone, regardless whether you're a Northern Hemisphere rugby fan or a Southern Hemisphere rugby fan. So how do you judge best? Let's look at 4 specific lenses, plus one bonus one that I found fascinating. First is entertainment. And that's not as simple as it sounds. For me, the most gripping game at the last World Cup was that England versus South Africa semi-final, which was an arm wrestle. It wasn't a tri-fest. But for most people, and for this specific lens, let's say entertainment means more scoring, more tries, and more line breaks, right? The second lens is competitiveness. How close the games are. Because here's the problem with pure entertainment, right? If both teams just trade tries all day, a 43-41 scoreline, for example, it becomes a bit like basketball. You score, I score, and the first 70 minutes barely matter. So you want it close as well as high scoring. So you need to have that bit of balance. The next lens is discipline. Though honestly, this one turned into less about discipline and more about how strictly each league is refereed, and I'll explain when we get there. And lastly, depth. And this is the one that I actually care about the most. Everyone knows the top 4 in any league are class. When they play each other, it's basically almost Test rugby level. But that tells you nothing. The real question is, when a bottom 4 team plays a top 4 team, how often do they actually win? The more often the little guys topple the big guys, the deeper the league is. At least that's my assumption, and I think you'd probably agree with me as well. And the bonus, I also looked at the home advantage, because one league genuinely does something weird here, and it actually matters for Test rugby. And again, I'll get to it in a bit. Right, so let's get into the stats. First up, points per game. And this is the most recent season, season 2026 if you're following Super Rugby, season 2025/2026 if you're following the URC, the Prem, Top 14, and the Japan League, right? So, top of the list, Japan's League 1 is 61 points a game. Then Super Rugby at 56, the Premiership right behind at 55.6, the top 14 at 53, and the URC, the clear outlier, at 48. Look at that again, because it's telling. Super Rugby literally changed its laws to speed the game up and cut scrums. And the Premiership, under normal World Rugby laws, is basically level with it. That's phenomenal. The URC is the only one really keeping scoring down. Now let's look at tries per game. It says the same thing. Japan nearly 9, Super Rugby 8, and again, the Prem right there at 7.8. Under standard laws, more rounds, and they're still throwing it around like that. The URC and the top 14 are lowest. And funnily enough, the URC actually edges the top 14 on tries. Yet, it's the top 14 everyone raves about. And hold that thought, right? Now let's move on to line breaks. Japan had 14 a game. And again, the Prem makes more than Super Rugby. 1 extra clean break a game across a whole season with more rounds. The top 14 is at the bottom, under 10. Now this one's interesting. Points per 22 entry. Every time you get into the opposition 22, how many points do you walk away with? Japan and Super Rugby are more efficient, just under 3. The top 14 is the lowest, 2.58. And here you've got to be fair. There's 2 ways that you could interpret this. Either the top 14's attack is the least efficient, or the top 14 has the best defense. So it's just harder to score against them. Honestly, I probably lean towards the second. Same number, but completely different narrative, right? Next, points in the last 10 minutes. Are teams still scoring late in the game, or are they killing it off? Japan, 4.5. So there's a try in there at the last 10 minutes. Prem, Super Rugby, top 14, all are around 4. The URC are the lowest again. And what late points they do get looks more like penalties than tries, right? And the other one that really separates them, percentage of points from tries. So let's draw a line at about 85%. Everyone's above it, except the top 14. The one league where more than a quarter of all points come off the boot, which ties straight back. They score fewer tries, lower points per entry, more penalties. It's just a different way to win a game of rugby. Now, I just want to do a bit of a check. Are you guys still with me? I really hope you're finding this as fascinating as I am. That was this season. Let's look at the 3-year trend. Top 14, the Prem, Super Rugby, they're all climbing on scoring. Japan's dipped a touch, but only because they started so high, around 62. So they've just held the ceiling. And the URC, they've kind of stayed flat, even slightly down. So while everyone else opens up, the URCs stayed tight, which brings us to the competitiveness. How close are these games? Here's the share of results by margin, sorted by one-score games. Anything inside 7 points is what I consider a one-score game. And a blowout, for me, is 22 points or more. Japan has the most blowouts and the fewest close games. No surprise, highest scoring. The URC is the opposite. Fewest blowouts, only 23%, and the most one-score games, nearly 39%. So almost 4 in 10 URC games come down to a single score. The top 14's right behind, 37%. Super Rugby, about a third is a one-score game, but nearly a third are blowouts too. And the Prem sits in between, with the most of those within that 8 to 14 point two-score games. On average winning margin, the URC is the tightest at 13.8. Then the top 14 at 15.4. Super Rugby is 16.6. Prem is at 16.7. Japan is the widest at 17.4. So if competitiveness means how close the games are, the URC wins this one comfortably. But are games getting tighter over the 3 years? The short answer is no. The URC's one-score share has actually fallen. They used to be 44% 3 years ago, then 40%, and now down to 32%. And this season, every single league saw fewer one-score games across the board. So you could say that across the board, attacking try-scoring rugby is back. And if you're a Southern Hemisphere fan, hoping that it'll feed into the international game, then that's a good sign. Now, the fun one, style. Let's start with tempo, ruck speed, and how many of your rucks are under the 3-second mark. Super Rugby and Japan, clearly the two fastest. And then you plot that against kicking. Kicks per 100 rucks, and the top 14 jumps out. Kicking more than anyone by a distance. The Prem weirdly has the slowest ruck of the lot, but still they kick a lot. The URC is the most balanced of the northern three. And the surprise, Japan. They have a very fast ruck, but they kick more than Super Rugby. That attacking kick game is something even Mike Blair's been on about, right? And I'd expect the All Blacks to lean into it. So, two camps. You've got Super Rugby in Japan, fast and more ball in hand. And then you've got the URC, Prem, and the top 14 who play a slower and more kick-led game. A few more. Let's look at passes per ruck. Japan is clearly highest, getting it to the edge fast. The top 14 is the lowest, no surprises. But this next stat is one of my favorite, and I probably should have led with it. Opposition passes per tackle. Stay with me because it tells you what kind of defense a league plays. A blitz defense shuts down time and space, right? They get off the line, they force you into errors early. So it makes fewer tackles and lets you string fewer passes together. A drift defense is more passive. It lets you go wide and then they react. So low opposition passes per tackle means an aggressive, in-your-face league. High means they have a drift kind of defense employed in that league. And look at the spread. The top 14 is the lowest, 1.09. They have the most aggressive line speed defense in the world. And across that many teams, that's seriously impressive. Japan's at the other end of the spectrum. 1.26. They've got much more drift. And there's much more space to play with. The Prem, Super Rugby, and URC sit in the middle. So there's your cleanest explanation for the whole top 14 picture. The defenses are so aggressive, it's genuinely hard to get clean ball, which is exactly why they kick the most and they pass the least. You're being strangled so much, so you put boot to ball. But here's the irony, and it's a beautiful, beautiful irony. Despite all that, look at offloads per carry. The top 14 offloads more than anyone in the world, more than Japan even. So despite the kicking, despite the most brutal defense in the game, the French flair still comes out in those offloads. That's why they're so good to watch. And the dominant tackle numbers back up the brutality. The Prem tops that. The top 14 is right there at its heels. So the URC ends up between the running, flowing rugby of Super Rugby, and the sheer physicality of the Prem and the top 14. And the breakdown. This is where Super Rugby shines. Nearly 6 turnovers won in each game. The breakdown kings of World Rugby are between Australia and New Zealand. And honestly, that's the bit that makes me think Dave Rennie is a great fit for the All Blacks. He gets what we're about, what our strengths are: fast ball, ball in hand, winning the breakdown. Now let's try and answer the question, is everyone speeding up? The data says mostly yes. Super Rugby was flying in 2024. They dipped in 2025, and now they're back up again. Japan started slow, and they shot up. And the top 14, URC, and Japan have all gotten quicker across the 3 years. Let's look at discipline next. And this is the one where I've kind of changed my mind on what I was measuring. The top 14 gives away far more penalties and far more yellow cards than anyone. But there's 2 ways to read it. Either it's the least disciplined league, or it's simply the most strictly refereed. And Super Rugby looks cleanest. But you can flip the narrative, right? But I think that's because our refs prioritize flow, ball in play. So they'll give a penalty where another league will probably give a yellow. And that's quite important to note, because it's what's coming for us when the internationals start. Those refs will be much, much more stricter. A knockdown, even accidental, that gets a quiet word in Super Rugby or maybe a knock-on will be considered a yellow at test level. Remember Warner Dearns slapped a ball down in the Super Rugby finals and barely got pinged? That won't fly internationally. So honestly, I'd stop calling this discipline and I'd probably call it referee strictness. The URC, Prem, and Japan are fairly balanced. The top 14 is the outlier. If you get a French referee, you already know that game's going to be tight. And they're going to be strict when refereeing games. And the trend back to Super Rugby point, cards are down because we've brought in laws to reduce them, while the URC, Japan, and even the top 14 have seen cards rise. The top 14 has gone from 0.69 yellows a game 3 years ago to 0.83 now. Now, the one I rate highest, the strength in depth. When the bottom teams play the top teams, how often do they actually win? In Japan, the top 4 win nearly 78% of their games. The bottom 4, they win just 24%, about a 54-point gap, top to bottom. The URC is nearly as top-heavy, a 50-point gap. So as tight as the URC's individual games are, it's still a league where the big teams almost always beat the small ones. Super Rugby and the Prem are a lot healthier. Gaps of 44 and 37. And then the top 14 comfortably the deepest of the lot. The top 4 win 62%, but the bottom 4 still win a third of their games, 1 in 3. They've got the smallest gap by a distance. So the cleanest way to see it is when a top 4 side plays a bottom 4 side, how often do we see an upset? In the top 14, you see 21% of games being an upset. That's better than 1 in 5. Super Rugby is 12. Then the Prem, 13%. But in the URC and Japan, the bottom 4 almost never get them. So yes, the URC games are close, but it's the same good teams that are winning them. The top 14, all 14 teams are genuinely competitive top to bottom. And that is real depth. And the bonus, the one that genuinely surprised me, maybe it's not a surprise to those French fans or those of you familiar with top 14 rugby. But for me, it was screaming at me, because how much does home advantage actually matter? We all know that home advantage does matter. If you look at stats across the board, if you're playing a game at home, you definitely have an advantage. But in the top 14, it matters enormously, right? Way more than any other league in the world. You're 3 times more likely to win at home than away. A 50 percentage point gap. Across the URC, Super Rugby and the Prem, it's what you'd expect, about 63 to 65%. The top 14's the massive outlier. Nearly 75% of games go to the home side, 3 in 4. And the strange one is Japan, where it barely matters. Home or away is basically a coin flip. And this is where it stops being trivia. and is important for Test rugby because the French don't win away. It's not part of their culture. And here's my worry for the French international team. And again, French viewers, please don't take this the wrong way, but this is just purely my conjecture, my opinion. Please don't come at me in the comments. I love French rugby. I love French fans. But if I'm being real, and let me speak my mind for a bit, if you want to win World Cups, you have to win in unfamiliar places. The reason that South Africa and New Zealand are so good is that they travel. And when they go north in November, there's a real belief that they'll try and win every game. France don't carry the same intensity on the road. Picture a full-strength French side: Dupont, Ramos, Penaud, the lot, Bilbierre, actually coming to Eden Park or playing in Ellis Park regularly and learning to win there. That's what turns a great club country into a World Cup winning country. And the trend? The top 14 used to be an even more extreme, almost 78% home wins 3 years ago. And now it's down to 71. It's still miles clear than other league competitions. Super Rugby is interesting. Huge home advantage 3 years ago. It dropped right off in 2025, which made for a brilliant even season. So let's bring it all together. And I'm not giving you one winner because there isn't one. It obviously depends on what you value. If you want entertainment, that is more scoring, more tries, line breaks, then Japan's number one alongside Super Rugby, followed by the Prem, URC, and the top 14. If you want competitiveness, tight games, then it kind of flips. The URC is number one, then the top 14, followed by Super Rugby, the Prem, and Japan's last. If you're looking at discipline, or really, I should say, how liberally the laws will be applied, then Super Rugby is the most free-flowing. The top 14 is the strictest. So if you have a Kiwi or Aussie ref, expect a fast-flowing game. If you've got a French ref, then you can expect every law policed. And look, I'll take flow over perfectly accurate game every single time, right? But if you like the laws enforced and you like that type of a tournament, then the French style might be for you. And the depth. This is the one that I rate highest. The top 14 clearly is the league that has the deepest depth. Followed by the Prem, then Super Rugby, with the URC and Japan still pretty top heavy. So there it is. You value tries and scoring. You love Super Rugby and Japan League. Value tight grinding contests. It's the URC and the top 14 all day. You want the ref to stay out of it? Super Rugby is your jam. Want a league where anyone can beat anyone? The top 14's got the depth. But for me, I'm still watching Super Rugby. That's my bias and I'm owning it. But after all this, I've definitely got much more respect for what's happening up north. And I genuinely tell my fellow All Blacks fans to go watch the top 14 or URC game properly. You might actually be surprised, especially the top teams, right, when they play. So that's the deep dive. If you enjoyed this kind of stat breakdown, please hit subscribe. We're a small channel, but we're growing fast, and it genuinely helps. And tell me in the comments, which lens matters more to you? Entertainment, competitiveness, or depth? And did this change your mind about any league? I'll be back this weekend reacting to the internationals. I can't wait, and I'm sure you can't either. Until then, cheers.